snow drives across the Hardanger Plateau in violent, swirling sheets, the wind carving ridges into the drifts and rattling against the steel towers of the high-voltage lines that snake toward the Weymouth plant. The night is so dark that only the faint glow of the moon outlines the cliffs above the Mana River. Floodlights cast hard white cones across the industrial complex, bouncing off the concrete walls and metal pipes that feed the heavy water production cells deep inside. German guards stand with collars high, rifles slung close to their chests, boots crunching on frozen gravel as they pace their routes. They see nothing beyond the reach of the lights. The mountains behind them seem empty. The ravines seem impassable. The plateau feels like a natural fortress that no enemy could cross in winter, yet the silence they trust is a deception. In the distance, hidden in a storm that muffles every sound, small figures on skis advance across one of the most unforgiving landscapes in Europe. They move without speaking, without leaving any sign except faint snow impressions quickly reclaimed by the wind. Each man knows that the lights ahead mark not only their target, but the most heavily guarded industrial site in occupied Norway. Far from this frozen valley, in laboratories across Europe and America, scientists work to understand the hidden power inside the atom. They test theories, coax reactions, and measure energies that no human being has ever harnessed before. Heavy water becomes one of the rarest and most valuable substances on the continent, a moderator capable of slowing neutrons and allowing a sustained nuclear chain reaction. In the wrong hands, it could support a reactor project that unlocks the potential for unimaginable weapons. Germany, now in control of Norway, sees Weymouth as an asset of immense strategic value. The plant's hydroelectric turbines provide the energy needed to produce heavy water at a scale unmatched anywhere else in the world. Within months of occupying Norway, German authorities tighten their grip on the facility, increase security, and raise production quotas. They do not know that Allied scientists and intelligence services already track every shipment, every change in output, every rumor of progress inside the Reich, and they do not expect that the most serious threat to their ambitions will come from a handful of Norwegian men trained in Britain, returning home through the sky. Before the raids, Weymouth is already known to Allied intelligence. French agents, working with the British, retrieved the world's existing heavy water stocks from Norway shortly before the German invasion, smuggling them out under the cover of diplomatic crates. But once Germany seizes the plant, production resumes under occupation. The Allies realize that the flow of heavy water cannot be allowed to continue unchallenged. They turn to a small group of Norwegian volunteers in Britain, many of them refugees from the occupation, men who left families behind, men who intend to return only for missions that could shape the future of the war. In Scotland, on remote training grounds battered by wind and rain, they learn weapons handling, silent movement, survival, demolition, and radio work. They ski in blizzards, march across slopes carrying heavy packs, and study every detail of the plant they one day hope to infiltrate. Some have military experience, some do not. All understand that their homeland is under the control of a vast empire, and that they may be asked to risk their lives to weaken it. The first phase of the mission begins in the autumn of 1942 when 4 Norwegians, Arne Kjelstrup, Jens Anton Poulsen, Knut Haugland, and Klaus Helberg parachute into the Hardanger Plateau as the advance party. They land in darkness, scattered and burdened by heavy equipment, then gather and hide their parachutes before moving into the wilderness. Their role is to observe, wait, and prepare for a larger British-led force that will attempt the main attack. The plateau is one of the harshest environments in Norway, a wind-beaten expanse of snowfields, ridges, and frozen lakes. The men build shelters out of stones and snow, ration their supplies with extreme discipline, and move cautiously to avoid leaving tracks that German patrols could follow. They hunt reindeer and scrape lichen from rocks to supplement their meager stores. Days stretch into weeks. Storms erase their footprints but also threaten their survival. Radio messages from Britain sustain them, but the silence between transmissions grows heavy. The winter deepens around them. Temperatures fall dangerously low. At night, the men sleep in their clothes, boots near their bodies to prevent them from freezing. They are surrounded by an enemy army and cut off from all support except the distant promise of reinforcements. When the main strike force finally attempts to reach them, disaster unfolds. The British plan, named Operation Freshman, calls for glider-borne engineers to land on the plateau and move toward Weymouth, but weather closes in, navigation errors multiply, and the gliders crash. Those who survive the crashes are captured and interrogated. Under Hitler's commando order, they are executed. The failure sends shockwaves through the Allied command structure and alerts German authorities that attempts against Weymouth are underway. Security increases, patrols intensify, access routes become more dangerous. For the 4 Norwegians of the advance party, the implications are immediate. They are alone again. Without the engineers they were meant to guide. They must now survive a full winter with minimal shelter, diminishing food, and no certainty that a second attempt will be made. They move camps repeatedly to avoid detection, often skiing long distances at night. They stay alive through a mix of skill, discipline, and sheer endurance. Their mission becomes a test of will as much as a test of tactical preparation. In London, the failure of freshmen forces a strategic reassessment. The Allies recognize that the only feasible way to strike Vemork is to rely entirely on Norwegian commandos who know the terrain, understand the weather, and can move silently through mountain conditions that defeated aircraft and glider crews. So he selects a new team led by Joachim Ronneberg, composed of young men with extraordinary skiing ability, physical resilience, and the capacity to operate deep behind enemy lines. They train relentlessly, reviewing intelligence gathered over months, memorizing the plant's layout, and refining the placement of charges that will destroy the electrolysis cells without causing civilian casualties. They build trust in each other during long marches and night exercises. Each man knows that success depends on precise coordination with the advance party still waiting in the mountains. The plan is simple in concept and extraordinarily difficult in execution. Parachute into Norway, find the stranded team, cross the plateau, infiltrate a heavily guarded industrial fortress, destroy the heart of Germany's heavy water program, and escape without leaving a trace. In mid-February 1943, after months of preparation, the strike force boards a Halifax bomber. The aircraft lifts off into darkness, crossing the North Sea toward occupied Norway. The men sit in cold silence, hands wrapped around their harnesses, gear packed tightly beside them. The red light comes on, the bomber steadies. One by one, they jump into the night. The parachutes open above a landscape they cannot see. They drift downward into deep snow, landing in a region where navigation is nearly impossible without familiar landmarks. The wind pulls at their canopies, the cold bites instantly through their clothing. They gather their supplies, check their weapons and radios, and orient themselves for the long ski trek that lies ahead. The light from the Halifax fades into the sky behind them, leaving them alone in the wilderness. They begin their journey across the plateau, pushing through deep snowdrifts and climbing ridges that give no shelter from the wind. The cold burns their faces, stiffens their clothing, and numbs their hands despite constant movement. Daylight offers little relief. The landscape appears endless, with only distant peaks breaking the horizon. At night, they dig snow pits to shield themselves from the wind, melt snow for water, and ration their food carefully. Their skis glide silently across frozen surfaces, leaving only faint marks. Navigation relies on compass readings and memory of terrain they have studied only on maps. After days of searching through storms and poor visibility, they finally locate the Grouse team. The reunion is emotional but brief, for every man understands the urgency of the mission. Food is shared immediately. The newcomers bring supplies that the advance party desperately needs. Warmth returns to the snow hut as the men plan their next move together, combining intelligence, strength, and resolve. They now face the final and most dangerous phase, approaching Vemork itself through terrain watched by German guards and shaped by cliffs, ravines, and sheer drops that make direct movement nearly impossible. Yet they know they must find a route that avoids roads, avoids patrols, avoids lights, and avoids leaving any sign that an attack is underway. The men study the valley from the high ground before dawn, watching the way the floodlights sweep across the plant, marking the rhythm of German vigilance. Below them, the Mena River cuts a deep, narrow path through the ravine, its ice-covered surface reflecting only faint moonlight. The bridge leading into Vemork is the obvious approach, but it is also the most dangerous, mined, fenced, guarded, and framed by hardened positions that leave no room for stealth. They dismiss it immediately. The only viable route is the one no German expects, down the vertical ravine wall, across the frozen riverbed, and up the opposing slope directly beneath the plant. It is a route shaped by ice, darkness, and risk. A single misstep could send a man plunging into rocks and snow far below. But it is also the route the Germans believe to be impossible, and therefore the route that offers the best chance of passing unseen. Night after night the team studies the terrain, memorizing the jagged contours and the faint shadows where they might descend. The cold stiffens the ropes in their hands as they test anchor points. Their skis, strapped to their backs, rattle quietly against their packs when the wind gusts. They move slowly, patiently, feeling for patches of ice, listening for any sound out of place. When the night finally comes to begin the descent, they approach in silence. The guards far above cannot see past the glare of their own lights. The saboteurs slide over the edge, gripping rock and ice, lowering themselves into the darkness. Snowflakes drift past them, illuminated only by the faint glimmer of the moon as they rappel downward. The air is sharp, the cold finding every gap in their clothing. They reach the riverbed and cross quickly, their breath clouding around them, boots scraping lightly against the ice. On the far side, the climb is steep, almost vertical in places, but they push upward with hands and feet, stopping only to listen for patrols or engines. No sound comes except the wind rushing through the gorge. At the top of the climb, the cable tunnel lies just meters away, a narrow, unguarded path leading into the heart of the plant. They crawl along the snow, flattening themselves against the ground as they approach the building. The tunnel is dark, cold, and lined with frost. They slip inside one at a time, boots brushing against cables that hum faintly with current. Ahead, a small window offers entry into the basement. Ronneberg tests the latch with gloved hands. It yields quietly. The men drop into the plant, landing on concrete floors that vibrate faintly with the machinery above. The air smells of oil, metal, and damp stone. They move with deliberate precision, following the layout they memorized in Britain. Stairs, a corridor, another door, then the heavy water electrolysis chamber. A caretaker unexpectedly appears in the hallway, surprised to see armed strangers in the plant at night. The commandos speak calmly, urging him to stay quiet. He complies. The tension rises, but no alarm follows. The team continues their movement, hearts beating faster. As they approach the electrolysis room, the door opens onto a chamber filled with tall, cylindrical cells connected by pipes and cables. These cells hold the heavy water that Germany plans to use in its nuclear research. The men fan out, placing explosive charges around the base of the equipment exactly as trained. Each movement is controlled. Each fuse is set with care to allow for escape before detonation. One man plants a British submachine gun on the floor, a deliberate act meant to show the Germans that this was an Allied military operation rather than an attack by local civilians. A gesture intended to protect the Norwegian population from reprisals. They check the fuses twice. 1 minute passes in near silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and the faint creak of pipes. Their gloves brush against cold steel as they finish placing the final charge. When the last man signals readiness, they retrace their steps, moving quickly but without panic. They climb back through the window, crawl out of the cable tunnel, and begin their retreat into the snow. The wind carries away their prints almost immediately. Behind them, the plant looms over the ravine, unaware that its core machinery is seconds away from destruction. A blast rips through the basement. The heavy water cells rupture, sending equipment and pipes crashing to the floor. The shockwave rolls upward through the factory, startling German guards and workers. Lights flicker. Sirens begin to wail. Within moments, officers rush to organize search teams. The saboteurs are already gone. They move through darkness, speed increasing as adrenaline floods their bodies. They reach their skis, fasten their bindings, and push into the night. The storm swallows them instantly. Snow whips across the plateau as they glide silently over frozen ground. At Weymork, chaos erupts as the Germans discover the destruction. Engineers scramble to assess damage, but the scale is clear. Production is halted, stocks are gone, and restoration will take months. Heavy water that Germany counted on for reactor experiments lies spilled across shattered floors and broken pipes. Anger spreads quickly through command. Orders fly across the valley, patrols deploy into the mountains, roadblocks appear at every path. Troops begin sweeping the plateau, convinced that the saboteurs must have fled toward known trails. They do not realize the men are already far beyond predictable routes. The commandos split into smaller groups to reduce their footprint. One group remains in Norway, slipping deeper into the wilderness and preparing to continue resistance work. Another group, including Ronneberg, aims for Sweden. Their journey becomes a test of endurance across some of the harshest winter terrain in Europe. They ski for hours at a time, faces raw from windburn, legs burning from constant exertion. They melt snow for water. They ration their supplies to the edge of starvation. The cold sharpens their senses, turning every distant sound into a potential threat. German patrols sweep valleys and search cabins, but the commandos leave nothing for them to find. Their tracks vanish quickly in drifting snow. Their routes bend across ridges and plateaus where no sensible traveler would go. They rest only long enough to regain strength, then push onward. Night after night, the cold deepens. The wind howls across desolate stretches of white. The men keep their skis angled against the gusts, leaning forward into the storm. They know that capture would mean interrogation and death under the commando order. They also know that their mission has already succeeded beyond expectation. The heavy water program is crippled, and the Germans are in disarray. Still, survival is not guaranteed. They cross frozen lakes at night, listening for cracks beneath the snow. They climb steep passes where exposed rock tears at their boots. They navigate forests where deep drifts slow their progress and force constant vigilance for patrols. As they move farther from Vemork, their confidence grows, but exhaustion presses heavily upon them. Some days the sky is white from horizon to horizon, offering no landmarks except faint variations in the snow. They steer by compass, memory, and instinct. The plateau becomes both refuge and enemy, a place where the Germans cannot easily follow, but where the elements threaten at every step. At last, after days of pushing themselves to the limits of endurance, the group bound for Sweden sees faint signs of human settlement in the distance: smoke from a chimney, a fence barely visible above the snow, a frozen road. When they cross the border, they feel no triumph, only deep relief and a quiet recognition that what they accomplished will echo far beyond these winter mountains. Behind them, the Germans attempt to rebuild Vemork, but the damage is extensive. Equipment must be replaced, production restarted, pipelines repaired. The Allies now understand that a single strike is not enough. Future shipments, repairs, and stockpiles will need to be targeted again. The Commandos know that the war for control of the atom is not finished, but they have set in motion a series of events that will shape the course of Germany's nuclear ambitions. Winter loosens its grip slowly over Arjukan, but even as the snow begins to soften on the rooftops and the sun creeps higher above the valley, the scars inside Vemork remain unmistakable. Engineers walk through the wrecked electrolysis chamber, with lanterns, stepping over twisted pipes, cracked metal housings, and pools of frozen residue left behind after the explosions. The smell of scorched insulation lingers in the air. German officers move briskly from room to room, inspecting damage and demanding answers. They expect sabotage. They do not expect the precision with which the charges were placed. The destruction is complete, yet controlled, causing no loss of life but eliminating the single industrial center capable of providing the heavy water the Reich requires. Frustration turns to anger as they realize how deeply the saboteurs infiltrated a site they believed impregnable. Reconstruction begins almost immediately. Workers patch walls, replace shattered pipes, and install new electrolysis equipment. German authorities send specialists to oversee the repairs, aware that every delay extends the gap between need and capability. In Berlin, scientists argue over reactor design, but all agree that heavy water remains important for their experiments. The pressure on Vemork intensifies. Security grows heavier around the valley. With guards posted at every road, bridge, and cable car station, patrols move constantly through the surrounding forests. Locals feel the weight of suspicion, their daily movements watched more closely than ever before. Yet none of this undoes the damage already inflicted. Months pass, and though production resumes, it never reaches the level the Germans desire. The sabotage has disrupted the flow of technical expertise and raw materials and introduced doubt into the entire supply chain. Still, the Reich pushes forward. They plan shipments to move heavy water and critical components out of Norway and deeper into Germany, believing transport offers greater safety than leaving material exposed in an isolated valley. The Allies intercept fragments of intelligence indicating increased activity. They know that another opportunity is coming, and that the window will be narrow. The heavy water plant becomes a target again, this time from the air. American bombers roar over the valley in late 1943, engines echoing between the cliffs as anti-aircraft guns fire upward. The bombs strike the plant and its surroundings, damaging structures, collapsing parts of the facility, and further shaking German confidence in the site's viability. The raids do not eliminate production completely, but they create uncertainty about whether Vemork can remain operational long enough to serve the Reich's nuclear goals. German leadership, fearing another commando attack or a more devastating aerial bombardment, decides the remaining heavy water stock must be transported to Germany as soon as possible. The task falls to a series of trucks, rail cars, and finally a ferry crossing over Lake Tyn. The shipment includes barrels containing heavy water, as well as sensitive equipment, and the Germans believe that transport is less vulnerable than fixed structures and that few would dare to attack a civilian ferry loaded with passengers. But the Norwegian resistance watches carefully. They understand what is at stake and know that if the shipment reaches Germany, it will strengthen research that the Allies are determined to impede. The commandos who survived Gunnerside cannot strike again in the same valley without severe risk, but others step forward to continue the mission. The operation to stop the ferry proceeds with quiet precision. Norwegian saboteurs infiltrate the dock under cover of darkness and plant explosives in the lower deck where the cargo is stored. The charges are timed to explode over the deepest part of the lake, ensuring the barrels sink beyond recovery. On the morning of the departure, passengers board unaware of the silent battle unfolding beneath their feet. The ferry moves steadily into the cold water, smoke trailing from its chimney. Halfway across, the explosion tears through the hull. Wood splinters, water floods the lower deck. Panic spreads as the vessel lists and begins to sink. Passengers scramble for lifeboats, but not all survive. Norwegian civilians and German personnel are lost alongside the cargo. The tragedy weighs heavily on the resistance fighters who authorized the mission, yet they understand that the alternative would have allowed critical materials to reach the Reich. The sinking of the ferry effectively ends Germany's hope of salvaging Wehrmacht's contribution to their reactor project. Whatever heavy water survives in storage becomes too risky to transport. Repairs drag on endlessly. The plant that once symbolized industrial innovation becomes a place marked by repeated failures, forced labor, and mounting fear. German scientists continue theoretical work, but without the materials to pursue large-scale experiments, progress slows to a crawl. As the war turns decisively against Germany on multiple fronts, research resources are diverted elsewhere, and any realistic prospect of a functional reactor disappears. In the aftermath, the Norwegian saboteurs disperse into different paths. Some join other resistance operations. Some return to Britain. Others remain hidden in the mountains, aiding Allied intelligence and preparing for future missions. Their work at Wehrmacht becomes known gradually, filtered through military reports and post-war interviews. Yet, for much of the war, only a handful of people truly understand the magnitude of what they accomplished. They denied the Reich a resource it desperately sought, using skill, discipline, and an intimate knowledge of Norway's unforgiving landscape to accomplish what larger forces could not. As peace finally returns to Europe, the surviving saboteurs revisit the valley where they risked everything. The cliffs seem less ominous now, the river less hostile, the plant quieter than they remember. They walk through the museum that eventually replaces the heavy water facility, reading placards that describe their actions in measured tones. Visitors see photographs of young men in winter gear, skis slung across their shoulders, eyes fixed with determination. To the saboteurs, those images capture only a fraction of the reality: the hunger, the cold, the fear of detection, the weight of responsibility, and the silent nights when they wondered if they would live long enough to see Norway free again. The legacy of Operation Gunnerside grows with time as historians analyze Germany's nuclear program through newly released documents. They conclude that while the Reich was far from building a bomb, the heavy water sabotage significantly disrupted their reactor plans and denied them a stability that might have changed the pace of research. The mission becomes a symbol not only of resistance, but of strategic clarity, an example of how a small group of determined individuals can alter the trajectory of a much larger conflict. The Commandos did not seek fame, yet their actions echo through the decades as one of the most effective sabotage operations of the war. In interviews recorded years later, the saboteurs reflect on those frozen nights. They speak quietly about the choices they made, the losses they endured, and the understanding that failure could have reshaped the war in ways none of them wished to see. They describe watching the lights of Wehrmacht from across the ravine, feeling the enormity of the task ahead while trusting their training and each other. They recall the moment the charges detonated and the sense of stepping into the unknown as they skied into the wilderness, pursued by enemy soldiers and storms. They remember the relief of reaching Sweden, the silence that followed, and the awareness that what they accomplished would remain hidden behind layers of secrecy for many years. Even now, the story retains its power. The image of Commandos moving silently across a frozen plateau, choosing courage over despair, stands as a testament to what resistance can mean in the face of overwhelming force. Their journey across the mountains, their precise work inside the heart of a guarded empire, and their endurance against cold and fear form a narrative that still resonates with anyone who seeks to understand how small acts of defiance can influence the fate of nations. And in the winter wind that sweeps across the Hardanger Plateau, it is still possible to imagine the faint trace of skis marking a path toward a mission that helped shape the world that followed.